The year 2018 was the Annus Horribilis, the awful year for the Catholic Church. We had the revelations of the sins and possible crimes of Archbishop former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. We had the grand jury report from PA, and it's just one roll of bad news after another, just a tsunami of shame and doom. In the middle of it all, the former nuncio of the United States of America, Archbishop Carlo Maria Viganò, wrote a series of letters to some mostly Catholic outlets in which he made explosive charges, including the recommendation that Pope Francis resign as a sign to other Catholic leaders. And we're going to talk about those letters and what the view from the Church from the Italian/European angle is with Marco Tosatti. He's the English language collaborator with Archbishop Viganò, and he joins us from Rome right on The Patrick Hoffman Show. Straight ahead, don't go away. Marco Tosatti is a renowned Italian journalist and Vatican expert. He's been covering the Holy See since around 1981. His written work has appeared in La Stampa, and he's contributed to First Things magazine here in the U.S. He's the author of several books, including The Prophecy of Fatima and Investigation of the Holy Shroud. You can find his blogs and other goings-on at marcotosatti.com. Marco, thanks for joining us.
Thank you to you.
Very happy that you entered the journalistic career field. I've been following your writing for several years now, and I'm a fan of your balance and faithfulness. So thank you for all that.
Thank you. You're very kind. I just try to do what a journalist should do. I mean,
how did you fall into the journalism game? Were you a good writer in school? Did you know you had a gift for putting words together?
It's my family was a journalist family. I mean, my father was a journalist. I never knew him because he died when I was 1 year and a half old. And he died in an air crash with a great soccer team in Italy, the Superga, Vettorino.
Wow.
I mean, and he was one of the 4 journalists on the plane. And then, obviously, I was brought up in the idea that journalism was the best thing that you could do. I mean, it was a way of serving the truth and serving the people and your country. And my brother, too, who was 10 years older than I am, started journalism, and he became probably one of the best, if not the best, sport journalist, sport expert in Italy. He died 11 years ago. And, it was normal for me to be a journalist. I mean, I think that the first time I tried to publish a newspaper, I was 8 years old or things like that, you know. So it was more or less in the family, in the blood. So I started working at 19 years old. And I'm 71 now, and I never stopped. Sorry for that, for my readers, but
Right.
I cannot stop, really, you know.
How often do you blog? Do you put something up every day?
Yes. And, I started following the Vatican as a journalist, and I was not a Catholic, really, at the time. In 1981, it was because the previous Vatican expert resigned. He retired, really, and they had to find somebody. And I don't know why they chose me, but I think it was because it was an inside choice. I mean, of course, it would have been more expensive to find somebody else outside, and
right.
And since I was quite interested in the foreign affairs and things like that, and they considered that the Vatican really was more foreign affairs.
Yeah.
So they asked me if I wanted to.
Marco, who was the they? Who hired you?
Who was the?
Who was the they? You say they were looking for and they hired you. Who was they?
Mean, the La Stampa management. My editor was.
I see.
It was the editor who decided. Yes, I was, and then of course I followed John Paul II and I followed Benedict XVI, and then I retired in January 10 years ago, really, January 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept the blog I had, that was San Pietro Dintorni. And then I think that the blog started to be a little bit troublesome. I mean, I tried to defend life and marriage and natural law,
Yeah.
And that was certainly against the line of a newspaper. And and then I tried to be critic of Bergoglio handling of a church,
Mm-hmm.
and that was troubling too, because at the same time they started Vatican Insider, that was more or less a para-Vatican site. So
Mm-hmm.
at certain point, my blog was closed. And so I started my own blog that's called Stilum Curiae. And
What is that in English?
it's Latin. Latin.
Yes.
Stilum Curiae means a stilum, that's both a knife and both the wooden thing with which the Latin people wrote. And
Okay.
Curia means of a curia, I mean of a Roman curia. But it's an historical phrase, because there was a man called, a priest, I think, called Paolo Sarpi in the 16th century, who was against the Roman curia, and he found refuge in Venice.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody tried to stab at him with a knife, and he said, "Agnosco stilum curiae." That means, in English, I recognize the dagger of a curia.
I see.
So
Yeah.
it's a double meaning. I mean, it's a dagger of a
Yeah.
curia, because certainly the curia doesn't like me, and at the same time, it's something with which you write. It's the stilum.
I gotcha. So it's a play on words that it works on multiple levels, because it evokes the sense of cloak and dagger, but also
Yeah.
was it Bulwer Lytton who said the pen is mightier than the sword? That reminds me of that too.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and that's why I chose it. And I was surprised because it's very successful. I mean, I started a couple of years ago, and I have now, and I'm alone. I mean, it's just a very, we say artigianale in Italian, means something homemade. It's a homemade blog,
Gotcha.
and I an average of 16,000 visualization every day. And
That's impressive.
Yes, I mean, I'm not talking about girls and and songs. I mean, it's a very narrow. It's a very narrow issue.
It's a niche. Yeah, I understand. There's an old
I
go
was
ahead.
very surprised about it.
Um,
And of course, I try to do what really most of the other journalists don't do. I mean, write everything, really, and not only the things that the institution likes.
well, that's sort of doing your job, isn't it? If you're simply the PR wing of the Vatican, you're failing.
Yeah, that's it is. I mean, it's something I do absolutely gratis. I mean, nobody pays me for it. I mean, I pay for my blog, but I think it's I feel it's my duty to do it. Really, my duty, because if you are a journalist, you are a journalist all your life long. That's it.
Yeah. Well, it sounds, not only is it free, but it's freeing. You can say literally whatever you want and just call things as you see them.
Absolutely. I just want to be sure that what I write, I want to have the moral certitude of the truth of what I write. That's sometimes I take risks, because you cannot always have evidence as you would like. But if I have the moral certitude that my sources are sincere and well informed, I take some risks sometimes, as I did.
Yeah.
But it was confirmed. For instance, when I wrote that the Pope dismissed without any reason 3 employees from the Congregazione for the Doctrine of the Faith.
Yes.
Against Muller's wish. And of course, nobody else wrote about it.
Against Muller's wishes?
Yes.
Okay, so for people who don't know,
I-
Cardinal Gerhard Muller was the former prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and he was summarily dismissed by Pope Francis in the middle. Well, that's another. We can get to that. Him being interrupted during saying Mass, but
he
so go
went
ahead.
to the Pope and said, "Why do you want to dismiss them?" And he said, "I'm the Pope. And I don't have to give any reason to anybody." And they were chased away. And then Muller, some months later, confirmed that my story was true. And in the always another story that I find incredibly astonishing. Well, Muller was celebrating Mass. We are in June 2014. And he was celebrating Mass for a group of German students in a little church near the Palace of the Congregazione of the Faith. And he received a phone call from the Pope ordering him to stop the procedure that the Congregazione was doing against Cardinal Murphy O'Connor about an abuse case.
Yes.
And Muller, 2 years or 3 years later, not openly, but absolutely clearly confirmed that the story was true. Of course, it was a risk because I had no evidence. I mean, Muller, of course, could not say, yes, it was true. He said, that's covered by the pontifical secret. But actually, it's a bad way when a pope interferes with the work of or a procedure. So he confirmed it.
So in the middle of saying Mass at the chapel adjacent to the CDF Palace, Pope Francis sends a lieutenant or an assistant to Cardinal Muller in the middle of Mass and says, the Pope would like to speak with you. And Cardinal Muller said, I'm saying Mass right now. And that person said, the Pope knows that, but leave anyway, stop Mass.
That's the story, absolutely.
And now we know that the person being investigated by the CDF was an ally of Bergoglio, Cormac Murphy O'Connor, the late Cardinal Archbishop, Cardinal of London, right?
Absolutely, he was one of his allies and one of St. Gallen group. I mean, the ones who organized more or less the election of an actual pope.
Yes. So he had a vested interest in protecting one of the people that was responsible for him becoming pope, I suppose.
He was investigated because a woman, maybe she was absolutely, she was not right, but a woman accused him to be present when she was molested many years ago.
Yes.
And of course, maybe it was not true, but you had to go and see if it was true or not. You cannot just by authority saying stop it. I mean, it's not very, very good, not at all.
And then Cardinal Muller, literally a minute before his 5-year term as prefect was expired, had another audience with the Holy Father in which he was summarily told, "You're being replaced. Let's shake hands. You're out of here," which strikes one as odd and abrupt. Cardinal Muller was not happy about it. He went public with his
no, he was not happy about it. But now I've seen that. He made understand that maybe he and the group, the three who were dismissed, were too harsh and too severe against the priests who were judged responsible for abuses. And in fact, after that he was dismissed, I've seen a few days ago an article saying that after his departure, the commission who takes care of his cases has been much sweeter and much softer. And so at least many of them have been, re-given the possibility to celebrate and things like that, when he was very hard on this point, saying, if you are responsible, you must get out and you cannot administer sacraments anymore. And so I think that it's a very hard time, I think, for the church right now, and for the Catholics.
Just visually, if you can just sit back a little bit, Marco.
Yes.
Just very good. Yeah, Cardinal Muller seems to be, in some ways, a tragic figure, because I've read a lot of his responses and I've kind of monitored how he has reacted to being harshly disciplined. And I know that the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith delivered somewhere near 200 notes, queries, suggestions, corrections for the draft of Amoris Laetitia. And yet, no matter how loyal a lieutenant he seems to appear, he can't win. He's
that's the problem for so many people in the Vatican, because cardinals, because they see what happens and they don't agree at all, and they suffer, and still they are loyal to the pontifical role, maybe not to the man who impersonates it, but to the image
to the office.
To the office. And so that's really a big dilemma for them, because you would like to say what you think, and you think, well, but in this way I damage the church, I damage the image, the role of a pope, of all the popes. And so I think they are really in a very, very, very bad situation, because they are,
walking on eggshells.
Pulled by two different things, by two different forces.
Yeah, so they are kind of living in fear of getting disciplined. So everybody's walking on eggshells. But isn't the brand, if you will, the reputation, at least what is spoken from the mouth of Pope Francis, is the encouragement of an atmosphere of dialogue and openness and free discussion. But when free discussion happens, heads roll and people are fired, and they're not sure where they stand in the papal court.
I think that what Pope Bergoglio says and what Pope Bergoglio does are two very different things. And it was the same, they tell me, in Buenos Aires when he was Archbishop. Como habla lindo Bergoglio, how speaks beautifully Bergoglio, they said. But then the actions didn't follow the words, and that's the same here. He said dialogue, and if you say something, your head is cut off. And so, really, people live in a state of terror in the Vatican, because even at the lower level, they are afraid of making a joke or saying something that could really jeopardize them, And some people have lost their place, and it's really a bad situation.
Marco,
very sad.
How much do you think the various reactions to Amoris Laetitia condition the Pope's opinion of them? So, in other words, if you're a cardinal, you're part of the Curia or not, you're serving the Vatican in some way, and you have question marks, dubia, if you will, about, say, number 8, section 8 of Amoris Laetitia, and how confusing it is and the weaponized ambiguity. If you're of that cast of mind, you automatically go on the bad list, right? But if you throw praise and flowers at Amoris Laetitia, you get promoted. Is this a fair summary?
I'm sorry, but it's like that. And the courts, the royal courts and the pontifical courts are all the same. And if king says blue, everybody says blue, 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 blue. And if you try to say red, he said red. And that's the same. So I think that the four cardinals, there were 5, I think, but I know the 4 cardinals who presented the dubia, and them died. And I think they died heartbroken because the Pope did not receive them. I did not answer them, and I'm really sure they died because they suffered so much. because they loved the church. I mean, that's the sure way of fall in disgrace. If you make an objection, that's a sure way of falling in disgrace. In disgrace.
The cardinals, at least the famous four, were Cardinal Brandmüller, Cardinal Meissner, who passed away, Cardinal Carlo Caffarra, who also passed away within a few months of each other, I believe, and Raymond Cardinal Burke. What do you say to people who claim that these cardinals were very disrespectful to the Pope because they violated Vatican protocol, that they should have kept it hush-hush, and that they went public to deliberately embarrass the Holy Father?
They wait at least 2 months before publishing the letter. It was not a disrespectful letter. It was written as a letter to the Pope should be. And when they were convinced and they were told that he would not give any answer, they felt that their duty was to make their dubia public. And I think it was right, because it's the same with Viganò. I mean, there's a point where your conscience is paramount. And you see, Caffarra and Meissner died not so many months later.
Yeah.
But they certainly presented themselves to the judgment, to their own judgment, with a clear mind, a clear conscience, saying we did all we could.
Yeah.
And that's what everybody should do. I mean, having before his eyes that, well, we are not here forever, and there's a longer life later. And so that's
much.
And so that's what counts, really.
Right.
And they did, and that's why they did it, and that's why Viganò spoke.
And we'll get to Viganò in just a moment. But the dubia are very simple questions. I believe there are 5 of them, and they can be answered in about 30 seconds. They're yes or no phrases, right? And they all have to do with weaponized ambiguity and the multiple levels of confusion regarding whether or not divorced and civilly remarried Catholics can receive Holy Communion. What do you think about this, Marco? Do you believe that it's proof that the Holy Spirit is protecting the charism of infallibility precisely because the Pope refuses to answer the dubia? Because if he answered honestly, we would have a problem.
Well, certainly he is in an impasse, because the dubia are very clear, and more or less we can sum it up saying, is that right to marry somebody when your first marriage is already valid?
Mm-hmm.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
And so can you live in a life of sin for the church and take the Eucharist when you live in a life of sin? Now, he cannot say yes, because in that case it would be heretic, certainly. And he cannot say no, because he would deny what he really wants that the people think and does. And so he cannot answer, really. Mm-hmm. But, that's a very ambiguous way of behaving for a pope. A pope should be clear. A pope should be a leader. And a leader who is ambiguous is a very dangerous and poor leader, according to me.
Hasn't he tipped his hand many times in a sideways manner? For instance, the letter by the Argentine bishops seems to indicate that the conditions could be possible whereby someone who's living in a state of objective sin could receive Holy Communion. So it's all sort of communicated sideways.
Always sideways. And I think that, I'm quite a frank person, and I like frank persons. And I think that behaving like that is the worst way of clericalism. It's really, it's behaving like a priest in the worst way. I mean, not having the courage to say white or black, and trying ways so not to commit yourself and have your things going all the same. So
Yeah.
I think it's really very, 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 I mean, we have been living under John Paul II and Benedict XVI, who were very clear persons, very honest persons. And now I think we are a little bit embarrassed by this kind of behavior. And it's all the same in all, I mean, if you think the dubia is like that, if you think the abuse problem is just like that, I mean, you cannot have a clear answer or a clear position. I appreciate very much was what Joseph Fessio said about the Viganò case to the Pope. Be a man, stand up and answer.
Yes.
And what he does not do.
Well, Father, I know Father Fessio. He's another frank person.
Is a frank person, and I appreciate. I don't know him personally, but I saw this phrase and I repeat it every day in my blog. I repeat every day in my blog that today is the 140th day that the Pope has not answered yet.
I noticed that.
With Viganò.
Yeah.
And then I put the phrase of Joseph, be a man, stand up and answer. That's what he should do. And he should do it because he's a Pope. He's not, he should do it, even if he was just, a single person, a person who has no responsibility. But since he's a Pope, he should really do it more and more.
I was reading an allocution that was given in 1951 recently by Venerable Pius XII, and it was a talk to, I don't even know if it exists anymore, but it was called the Association of Large Italian Families. And he was praising the generosity of spirit and so on of these beautiful large families. And if you compare that with the comments that the current Holy Fathers made about Catholic couples are not supposed to be rabbits, it's almost like a different religion, a different outlook altogether. It's a very high conflict.
Yes, I mean, I really on a few days ago he said it's if you are not. I mean, his intentions sometimes are good, but I think that he's not adequate to the role. I mean, he speaks just like somebody in a pub, in a bar. He said, well, if you go, you see the Catholics who go to Mass every day, and at the same time they hate people. It would be better if they behave like atheists. They would not go to the church.
Yeah, better to not go to Mass. Right.
What is his intention? To say that you must follow what you believe in. But the way he puts it, it's incredibly clumsy because I would say, even if you are atheist, it would be good for you to go to the church because maybe one day God might talk to you.
Yes. Yeah, the source of grace. Maybe you'll really take it to heart and change your. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I don't know what I don't think he knows very well what he says sometimes. I mean, he just sees the intentions and he does see the implication of his words. And I'm trying to excuse him.
Well, we're all trying to. This is my next question for you, Marco. At what point did you get red-pilled? I remember March 13th, 2013, quite vividly. I remember where I was sitting. I was watching a live news feed, and my wife, who's from Peru, was standing next to me, and he walked out onto the loggia, and it was just all kind of strange. Now, I might be retrofitting my current views and back into that experience, but I remember thinking, he doesn't have the traditional vestments. He just sort of raised his hand and said "Buonasera," and then he bent down to receive prayers, and I couldn't help but notice Cardinal Gottfried Daniels standing next to him.
That's it.
And
That's it.
it was sort of, that was odd from the beginning.
Well, I tried to, how could I say, to tell myself, no, listen, wait, maybe after I will. At Things happened, and the good people were chased away, and honest people were put aside, and other people, you know, and then things came up, because if you think of his friends, Danels, and we know that Danels one was somebody who covered the priest who abused his own nephew.
Correct.
And okay, Mahoney, you know about Mahoney better than I do. McCarrick, Murphy O'Connor, Errázuriz Ossa, and who is now a Chilean, who is now under procedure from the police for covering up. I mean,
Martini.
yes, and
Casper.
Casper. But I mean, I'm just talking about the people who had problems with abuse crisis, but real problems. Mahoney was more or less put to a life of a very retired life, because he covered I don't know how many priests in Los Angeles.
Not anymore, Not anymore, Marco. He is scheduled to be one of the headline speakers at the Los Angeles Religious Ed Congress.
No, and that's incredible. The Pope tried to send him to Stanton last year, I think, as a pontifical. And McCarrick is just one of the examples. And so, you see, and then I knew more things, and some of the things I knew I cannot write them, but I know them. And I mean, a lot of things made me think, well, there's a problem. There's a problem with the handling of the church. And what he says, I've been covering the Vatican since 1981. 1981, yes. And I've never seen a pope, or never read of a pope who insulted Catholics like he did. I mean, there's a list of insults.
There's a book out, Little Book of Insults.
Out of it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible. What did they do to be insulted? In a world where to be a Catholic is already some kind of a stigma, and it's already difficult. You should encourage them, not to call them people who sgrana rosari, people who jokes with the beads and things like that. You know, I mean.
Yeah. When his hectoring, his little kind of nasty comments, I already feel like I usually feel that they're directed toward me, other Catholics in America. It's like
he said, "Who am I to judge?" And he doesn't do anything but judging when Catholics or Christians are concerned. If you listen to him, he is already giving judgment on people.
Yeah,
but I don't think really that. I mean, what he says is not always really very well, you know.
From a journalistic communication point of view, I always wondered how Greg Burke could do his job as the press office director, and he just recently abruptly resigned at the new year, along with his assistant Paloma Overejo, the Spaniard woman who was his assistant. Were you surprised at how Greg Burke left so quickly?
Well, yes, because he tried to do his job probably, and he's a professional. The same thing you can say about Paloma Garcia Ovejero. But there's another thing about this reign which is disturbing, and it is the way it well, seems to be more and more a reign of the popes of a renaissance. I mean, it's absolutely authoritarian, and there's a court around him, and there's a small circle of people around him who has all the power and who has the ear of a king, you know, and so certainly Burke and Paloma were not of a magic circle around him. Spadaro, Tornielli, and Ruffini, and so they had to live. And I mean, I think what I think really it is. This Pope enjoyed the sympathy and the friendship of the mainstream media for a very long time. Now, some of them, Washington, New York Times, Frankfurter Allgemeine, and many others, Der Spiegel and Washington Post, after the Viganò problem and after the abuse crisis, that's not only American, have started to open the eyes.
That's true, especially Der Spiegel.
Yes.
Amazing.
And so I think that there is the wish to assemble all the loyal, faithful retainers around the banner in a small group, you know, and to hold the fort against what seems to be, not a really a great tide, but a growing number of criticisms and loss of credibility. And certainly he has lost a lot of credibility on this, in spite of his speeches and things. And so he has to give power to less and less people and to the loyalists. That's what happens. For instance, this thing, the Greg Burke and Paloma Ovejero dismissal, and the fact that the Osservatore Romano, the editor, was changed abruptly too, were two blows to the Secretary of State, because both the Holy See Press Office and the Osservatore Romano were under the direct control of the Secretary of State. And now it seems that it's no more that. Evidently, even the Secretary of State was not judged to be loyal enough.
Would that be Parolin?
Parolin, yes.
Parolin is no longer deemed to be loyal enough? Really?
Evidently, Parolin is I think that he's trying to prepare himself to run for the next conclave, has a moderate man who has been, with Pope Francis, but would be able and would be willing to put the boat on a more level, on a more stable course. And so probably he's trying to distance himself a little bit from the Bergoglio reign and, to try and take his own chances in the next conclave, but maybe will not be so far away, even though we don't know when. But, and so probably somebody, just like in a court, there's somebody who has maybe said to the Pope, but Parolin is not so loyal as he should be. And so it's the usual mechanism in every powerful court.
When
Or
we
big
read
tech,
that
if you
when we read
prefer.
that someone who works in and around the sphere of the Vatican has quit, is that code for they were laid off?
I'm sorry, repeat it.
When announcements are made like Greg Burke and Paloma Ovrejo have resigned, is that code? Is that a euphemism for that they were fired? Is this the language of euphemism?
Not necessarily, but certainly that they were put in a situation where they could not stay there anymore. I mean, you don't have to fire somebody to make him go. Just
Yes.
simply, you can make his life useless or impossible,
Yes.
and or you make ask him things that he doesn't want to do,
Mm-hmm.
or you
Mm-hmm.
can imagine a strategy that he doesn't agree with. So,
Yes.
there are many ways.
Just make life intolerable. Which leads me to Cardinal Robert Sarah of Guinea, and he's sort of the last man standing. He's always puzzled me how a man so rooted in the tradition, so respectful of things like celebrating Mass ad orientem and keeping as much Latin as possible. He's still there. He doesn't seem to have exited yet, and perhaps the Holy Father uses him as a bit of a trophy to prove that he's balanced. Does that make sense?
Well, he is there, and certainly he has suffered a lot of things during this papacy, and maybe is just there because I think that the Pope doesn't think that nobody is really important. I mean, he uses people. He uses people for his own purposes and his own strategies, and then he drops them. And of course, Sarah, when he probably will not be confirmed when his time will expire, and the Pope will not give a damn about it. Mm-hmm. I think that he is a very, really saint and a very good man. Mm-hmm. And I pray that he will be the next Pope, because
well, yeah, I was going to say, Marco, be quiet, be quiet. You know the phrase, he who enters the conclave with a white hat comes out with a red one.
Yes, I know. But certainly he will not be, but it's just my dream.
Sure,
because, of course. But I think that really he should be a great Pope, but he will not be. He will not be.
Let's turn now to your collaboration with Archbishop Viganò. And I've noticed that the U.S. bishops who are perceived, even if they're not fully conservative, if they're perceived as having a conservative cast, they do not get promoted. Jose Gomez of Los Angeles is still an archbishop, not a cardinal. Archbishop Alexander Sample, Bishop Thomas Olmsted. There's a long list of solid men who will probably stay where they are.
That's something I wrote. I mean, and of course I have no evidence, but certainly I know, and I have a moral certitude of this, that has been prepared a list of bishops who, in the United States, who, must not be promoted, and whose suggestions in the case of new bishops should not be followed. Mm-hmm. And, we are in front of a way of governing the church that's absolutely dictatorial. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it never happened before, because the Pope certainly has theoretically all the power in the church, but there's always been in the church, in the modern church, in the last century, a balance inside the church, so that the Pope takes in account different opinions and different things. And even from a law point of view, mm-hmm. There's the Segnatura Apostolica. The Segnatura Apostolica is the supreme tribunal of a church where you can appeal when you think, as a lay or a priest or a congregation, that somebody with authority in the church has wronged you. Now, I know at least 2 cases. The sisters of the Francescani dell'Immacolata and the fraternity of priestly fraternity of Santi Apostoli in Belgium, whose appeal was blocked by the authority of the Pope. And so they couldn't go on asking for justice. That's something very, very, very bad.
Yeah, that's intolerable.
And that gives you an idea of the people who's governing the church right now. And so, even with things, the church has always been at and when all the other confessions have always been out. Either you are here or you are not in. And the church has always tolerated inside different opinions and different feelings and different sensibilities and so on. So now it's no more like that. Either you follow the mainstream, either you are cast out. And I think that's really the way to the destruction of a church.
I've just put a timeline here together of last summer. July 28th, there was a statement near the end of July. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops said that the Vatican had accepted Theodore McCarrick's resignation as a cardinal, which is sort of a passive way to put it, as though McCarrick volunteered, saying, "Here, take my red hat, I quit." Pope Francis told McCarrick to, quote, observe a life of prayer and penance in seclusion. In mid-August, you have the devastating PA grand jury report put out by Josh Shapiro. Disgusting accounts. I mean, they're accusations, but they're horrible reading. And then on August 22nd, Carlo Maria Viganò, the former nuncio, issues his 11-page letter to various outlets. At what point in that timeline did you begin to collaborate with Archbishop Viganò? Did you reach out to him? Did he say, I'd like some help on the English translations?
I will tell you all the story in few minutes. I knew him socially. I mean, I met him 2 or 3 times before that. And then the McCarrick case came out. And somebody in Italy, Andrea Tornielli, wrote an article in Vatican Insider. Andrea Tornielli, who is now the new direttore editoriale of Vatican News,
yes,
a close friend of the Pope, wrote an article where he suggested that the previous nuncios, Sambi and another one, Latin Spanish one, and Benedict XVI had something. I mean, there were shadows on the behavior of these nuncios and of Benedict XVI in the McCarrick case. Okay, then a friend of mine, who is not a man of the church, called me and said, "Did you read it?" Yes, because he said, and then he said, "You know, a friend of mine, Carlo Maria Viganò, is very angry about it and would like to make an interview to correct these things. Would you like to do it?" I said, "Why not?" And well, he will call you. He called me, and he came to my home in Rome, and I was prepared to make an interview. And he said, "Not yet. Before, I want to tell you a story." And he told me all the story that you read later in his report. At the end of the story, I said, "Okay, let's do it." He will say, "Well, I need a couple of days more because I have personal affairs to take care of. And well, in some days' time, we will meet again." Then the PA report came out. And so I called him and I said, "Have you seen the PA report?" maybe if you still want to make the interview, it would be the right time, because the things you told me are more or less the same that we have seen written in the PA report. And he said, okay, we will meet next week. He came to me and he told me, well, I've thought it over, and maybe it's better if instead of an interview, I prepare a document, and I have prepared something. Do you want to read it? Mm-hmm. So I read it. I gave some suggestions. I mean, I made some editing like a journalist. Of course, because it was, it was directed to normal people, so you had to clear some things. And then he told me, well, I'd like to make it appear in Spanish and English too. And I said, well, I think that an English person I know is Edward Pantin, and for the Spanish side, I know very well Gabriel Ariza of Info Vaticana. We could contact them. So we did it, and he left me the document, I mean, on a digital document, mm-hmm. and I sent it to the English people and to the Spanish people and to the newspaper I have chosen, that was La Verità. That's not so great a newspaper, but it's free, because I was sure that if I have spoken to another mainstream newspaper, the Vatican would have been informed before the publication. And so I sent it to the editor of La Verità, Maurizio Belpietro, who read it and told me, well, it's a bombshell. Yes, it is, I said. And we had to wait to publish it, because it was an 11 pages document.
Yes.
So it had to be translated, and translated by somebody who knew a little bit of ecclesiastical language, mm-hmm. too. So instead of publishing right now, it was the 26th of August, a Wednesday. Instead of publishing the following day, we had to wait until the weekend. That was Sunday, the 26th. I mean, it was the 23rd of August, Wednesday, and we published it the 26th. It was a Sunday. And that's the story. That's the way I collaborated with him.
And that happened to correspond with the departure of Pope Francis from the Dublin World Meeting of Families. Because
yes, because he was in Dublin. Yes, he was in Dublin.
Well,
but
go ahead.
I mean, it was good because he could be interviewed about it. But I mean, it was not really aimed at it. It was. I mean, I would have preferred to publish it on the Thursday, really.
Before or after?
Before. I mean, just Wednesday I read it, and I would have preferred. I sent it to the newspaper the afternoon, mm-hmm, just to get rid of it, because it was a little. It was a really bombshell. So.
Well, the enemies of our Archbishop Viganò's enemies will say that this the timing of Sunday was designed to humiliate him. But I've never bought that, because if you really wanted to humiliate the Pope, you would do it immediately before the World Meeting of Families happened, so that everybody's talking about that. He had a chance to review it, and he was asked about it, and he said, "I will not say one more word," and then he encouraged journalists to use their professional competence. Okay.
Yes, but I mean, I quarreled with some of them, especially from the great international agencies, because when somebody tells you, I will not say a word about this, and you go on asking uninteresting questions on the trip, you make a mistake. You should have said, okay, you will not say a word of this, and we will not ask any more questions about anything until you give an answer. Because that's something that the people wants to know.
Yeah.
At the same thing, And the same thing happened after the Baltic trip, when they even silenced Cindy Wooden, who was trying to make a question a month after the explosion of the Viganò case.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't want, the Holy See Press Office and the Pope did not want to answer the questions. And I think that in a case like that, the journalist should have the guts to say, okay, thank you, and we stop here.
Yeah, no, there's no point. If you're going to be silent on Mount Everest, we don't want to talk about foothills.
Of course. And I told them that, especially a friend of Reuters. Mm-hmm. I asked him, but which kind of journalist are you to be treated like that?
And then to go back for more and go on more trips. Yeah. Well, see, the papal court extends into the ranks of the journalists, obviously.
Writes the things that the institution is interested in, and not what the people is interested in.
Yeah.
Because the questions that Viganò put up are still unanswered. All of them.
Would you say that the silence of the Pope regarding the Viganò letter is a sort of a sequel to the silence of the Dubia?
He cannot answer, because of course he cannot say no, because it's not true. And he cannot say, yes, I did it. I knew that he was, that McCarrick was what it was, mm-hmm. And I used it. And I used him for 5 years, until a late tribunal put him in a situation which the church could not ignore, because mm-hmm. the truth is that, if there was not the lay justice who put up the case of a minor mm-hmm. who was groped or I don't know what by McCarrick,
more than one. Yeah.
He would still be there, quiet. Mm-hmm. The church took steps after, as far as I know. Am I right or wrong?
Well, based on what is known publicly and what the main victim of McCarrick has said, his name is James Grine. Yes. James Grine has said that Father McCarrick baptized him when he was 2 weeks old. Yes. Yes. And molested him for the first time at the age of 11. It's just a disgusting story. I don't want to go into there. Yeah. Unless lay people get involved, unless the press or the police get involved, nothing seems to happen, Marco. It's very depressing.
That's what I think. It's very depressing because, they lie. They cover. It's not just the McCarrick case, because in Chile, the Pope said, well, he lied, because he said that he never received a request from the victims to be received. And they wrote to him. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And he treated them just like defamers.
Gossips.
Gossip, and it was not true. And only when he was with the back to the wall, he obliged to the bishops. It's always the same thing, just like every good dictator does. When he cannot hide anymore, he put the charge on somebody else.
And then went over
like with the American bishops right now. Have you seen the letter?
Yeah, I have, yes. Yeah, he uses the second person plural, you, the scandal you have brought upon the church.
But, and for instance, one of his, maybe the main counselor is Maradiaga. Maradiaga, Cardinal, Honduras, Tegucigalpa, and the right hand of Maradiaga is a bishop. And he's been obliged to resign, auxiliary bishop, to resign because 50 seminarists wrote an open letter accusing him of homosexual harassment. And the newspapers in Honduras discovered that this man, Pineda, I think is his name, the one who was the right hand of Maradiaga, the main counselor of the Pope, had a lover, and this lover lived for a certain time in the same villa, in the same mansion with Maradiaga and Pineda. And Maradiaga is still there. And Maradiaga is the man who promoted Cupich to Chicago.
Yes.
You see, it's a circle of complicity.
Yes. And
How can we trust them? How can we trust them anymore? But not only the American bishops. I'm talking about the Pope and his friends. That's the main problem, that they are really destroying the credibility of the church.
It's not doubtful. It's indubitable at this point. It's hiding in plain sight. I'm very saddened by people who refuse to see it.
They will have to answer about this.
Yeah, the Tobin, McElroy, Farrell, Cupich, all plucked from relative obscurity, going around the normal turna with the list being presented to the Holy Father. That was all abolished. It's almost like Pope Francis wishes that the Curia itself didn't exist. Like, he seems to have completely ignored the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. It might as well not exist.
Absolutely. His own, that's the same thing he did in Buenos Aires. I mean, he doesn't use this, and that's another thing. When I was talking before of the balancing of powers, but the Curia really has, if you are a good Pope, a balancing effect on you. I mean, you listen to the head of the congregations, and you follow their advice, and you can govern in a more balanced way.
Because you have input from opposite opinions and so on.
Yes, of course. And even of opposite, but different opinions.
Yes.
Not necessarily opposite, but different.
That's a good point.
But if you listen only to your own people, and you bypass regularly, and as a rule, as a method, the governing structure of the church, here we are. That's where we are.
He's alluded a couple of times to resigning. Do you think he'll resign?
Never.
Do you think he should?
No. I think that, I think that he should really, because it would be a good thing for the church, because he is making the people lose trust and confidence in the church. I work a lot with the social, Twitter, Facebook, and so on and so forth. And I feel the pulse of of a low Catholic. And I see that more and more are saying things that would have not been said 3, 4, 5 years ago about the Pope and the Church.
When you say low Catholic, Marco, do you mean low information or low level?
I mean grass.
See. So it's the hoi polloi, average, good, ordinary Catholics.
Yes, ordinary Catholics.
Yes,
I mean,
okay.
Though in this case, I mean, not people who is in some place of power or understanding inside the church. No, the normal mass-going Catholic, you know.
Joe Sixpack in the pew.
Yeah. That's it.
Well, I will never forget the first time I sat down with the first letter of Archbishop Viganò. It was like lightning in a bottle. I'd never read a document like this in many years by someone who's given so many years of his life to Christ and the church. And then I found that his response to Cardinal Ouellet's intervention even more powerful. Very prophetic, simple, with the spirit of the fear of God and the desire for the truth. It was just very inspiring to me. And I don't know how... I wish I could communicate to Archbishop Viganò how many millions of people love him and admire him and are praying for his health and strength.
You know, I mean, his cellular phone doesn't work anymore. Sometimes he writes to me, and I answer, and I try to convey, because many people write to me saying, please tell Archbishop Viganò we are praying for him and we thank him. Even... for instance, I made a lecture some months ago in France because I was invited, strangely, because I was never invited before, by the Fraternity of St. Pius X.
What is that? You mentioned them before. What is that? The fraternity.
Sorry? A lecture.
The letter to who?
I did a lecture on the China problem.
Ah, I see, yes.
To some dozen priests of the Lefebvre group.
Oh, I see. SSPX.
Okay, St. Pius.
Okay.
In France, they invited me. And then many of them came to me and told me, please, if you have a contact with Archbishop Viganò, tell him that we are praying for him and we thank him. And so I try to convey him all these good things, because of course his life is not simple right now, I think, because he lives in exile and
this is the thing, Marco. Didn't you tell me he handed his phone to you saying, I'm done? Because he knows that the people who control the Lavender Mafia, the people who are deadly serious about their own agenda, they're dangerous people. And if he had his phone with him, they could ping his location and find him. I mean, is the church an international criminal syndicate where someone who's given so much of his time and energy, his whole life to the church, now has to live in fear? It's just outrageous.
Well, I don't know. Certainly, he didn't want. He told me that he would disappear, and he told me that it was better like that. Because, of course, he didn't want to be bothered by journalists like us. That would...
that's a terrible fate.
Tracks, yes. And I think that he wants to disappear for another reason. Because from a canonical point of view, if there are some procedures against him, they must be handed personally. So... unless you know where he is and you can reach him,
yes,
well, they cannot punish him.
I see.
So if he's hidden somewhere and they don't know where he is, and of course with a cell phone you can be tracked.
Yeah.
A simple computer, I don't think so. I mean, and sometimes it writes, sometimes it doesn't, but it's more difficult, certainly.
Well,
so I think that's one of the, and maybe I don't know, but maybe he has the copy of some documents, maybe, and so he wants to be quiet.
I hope that he does, because I can almost hear the sound of a shredder in Washington.
But did you know something, Patrick? Nobody since August has denied anything of what he said.
That's the astounding part, yeah.
He spoke about at least a dozen people in the Vatican. Not only the Pope, but other people. And not a single one dared to deny anything.
Including Cardinal Ouellet.
They are afraid that he can hit back with a devastating evidence. What happened with the Kim Davis? The only thing they tried to do was to say in an interview in New York Times that the Pope didn't know anything about the Kim Davis meeting before, and that it was Viganò's fault because he was surprised. And the day after, he showed the memorandum he had presented to the Pope, and they had to be very quiet about it.
Yeah.
And the Welle denial was not a denial at all, because it confirmed that Benedict had put sanctions on McCarrick.
Mm-hmm.
If you remember, at the beginning, when Viganò spoke about the sanctions to McCarrick, some of this, what I call Bergoglio press gang, I mean, the people who tries to take care of his propaganda.
The PPG.
Yes. Well, put in doubt that Benedict ever put sanctions on McCarrick. And Welle confirmed it. And so it was not a denial at all.
Yes.
And Welle did not deny that Viganò spoke to the Pope of McCarrick, and not by his own initiative, but because the Pope asked him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he said, oh, but in a moment like that, he had so many things to think about. But he didn't say, Viganò did not spoke of McCarrick to the Pope. So 4 months elapsed, and no one has denied anything.
Yeah,
I think that's incredible.
Yeah,
incredible.
The central claims of Archbishop Viganò letters have not been challenged.
Not even
the
other ones, because he spoke of Sodano, he spoke of Parolin, he
Mm-hmm.
spoke of Sandri, he spoke of Filoni, he spoke of a lot of people. Not one of them said anything.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's something, isn't it?
It is. It is. It's not like they brought evidence that refutes it. They simply attacked him personally. It all seems to go back. They just want to undermine his reputation and go after his person.
But a bastard who says the truth remains a bastard. But the truth remains the truth.
Is that an Italian maxim?
Yes.
It probably sounds more musical in Italian. I like it. Well,
but anyway,
yes.
The meaning is true, eh?
Yes. Yes, it is. It is. It's very good. It's very colorful. I appreciate your time very much, Marco Tosatti. And I just want to give a note to my listeners and viewers. Please don't write to Signor Tosatti getting notes to Archbishop Viganò. He's already flooded with people like me who have annoyed him like a bunch of buzzing bees. So just keep the Archbishop in your prayers.
Yes. I mean, write to me to tell Viganò we are with you. Don't write to me for interviews, because I'm not his PR.
You're not his press secretary, right? Okay. Well, I'd love to maybe have you back to talk about the bitter winter and the situation in China. I'd like to do a series in China in a few months with the Patriotic Church and what the actual Roman Catholic Church is now suffering in China. Partly as a result of McCarrick. There's a McCarrick connection there.
Yes, of course. It's all the same band who has taken hold of the church.
Well, I'm going to remember that. What's that?
Let's pray.
Yes. Amen.
Pray.
Amen. I'm going to remember that truth bastard phrase for a long, long time. So thank you. Marco, thanks for all your work. Marco Tosatti is the website. All right. God bless. And I do hope to keep in touch. This is the Patrick Coffin Show. Be a saint. What else is there?
Hey, this is Patrick Coffin. If you like what you see and hear and you want to see and hear more, consider joining Coffin Nation as a full member. Just click right here and find out more about what that means. Nipsey, my fedora. That's Coffin Nation, the world's largest online community of culture builders. Click right here. See you on the inside.